Hey everybody, Dave here again, and I've got another exciting video for you today. Today we want to talk about on-premise gateways, and specifically 10 secrets that I think you really wish you knew much earlier than maybe what I'm about to tell you. So this is really all geared towards the Power Platform and trying to keep us all sane and continuing to enjoy the platform and to get the most out of it. So to begin, let's talk about the number one area, which is the on-premise gateway, obviously. And so to begin, I wanted to start with a little bit of architecture, at least at a high level, so that those of you that are new are not completely lost by this video. But essentially what this is, I want you to think of the gateway or the on-premise gateway. I want you to think about it in three different categories, three different sections. So we've got the back end. This is the cloud services. This is all these square blocks at the top. You know, Azure Analysis Service, Logic App, Power BI, Power App, Power Automate, blah, 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 right? Those are all the back-end services. Then we got this middle tier. This is the Gateway Cloud Service and the Azure Service Bus. These are meant for facilitating requests and traffic and kind of handing things off to the various services that request it, but it's also essentially an ear that constantly listens out for an on-premises gateway installation to basically ping and say, hey, I'm here. And then of course, when a transaction is happening, it's pulling information from, you know, everything that you may have locally on-prem. And let's digress just a real quick moment and talk about on-prem and what does this mean. So on-prem covers so many scenarios. What does this actually really mean? It essentially means anything that's not in the cloud, right? This could be a on-premise in your data center, which technically isn't on-prem at your organization, but it's considered on-prem because it's essentially your hardware, your IT, your infrastructure, not really a public cloud or a private cloud. It's kind of just its own thing. I guess, all right, maybe I misspoke a little bit. It could be a private cloud, but in any event, just think about your information stuck in a data center, and or maybe you don't have a data center. In the older school versions of this, you know, companies used to keep their servers and their hardware in an IT server room, and they used to be quite extensive, and sometimes and most often they were put in the basement to keep, you know, the servers and things cool, as well as lower the cooling costs for all of the heat that these servers generate. Anyway, I've digressed. The on-premise data sources can be anything from a multitude of SQL Server to other databases, and also files that might be stored like Excel, SharePoint, things of that nature in the area. So this is really the premise of the whole point of doing a gateway. All right, so nobody really gets to tell you this, and it's not like they come up to you and say, hey, Susan, hey, Bob, guess what? Power BI service, if you don't implement it the right way, it can kind of really have a negative impact for you when you're going to think about establishing a gateway down the road. It's just not the kind of thing that happens at the water cooler, right? So you just kind of trial and error, you get into a pickle, you get into a situation, and then you kind of figure this out or learn the hard way. So if you stumble across this video, let me try to save you a bunch of pain. Okay, so the first thing that you really need to know is that the on-premise gateway by default is going to be installed into the same region as Power BI's default data location. Now that might be a mouthful, but what this means is chances are somebody in your organization, maybe yourself, went to Power BI, set up an account, and as soon as they did that, the problem is, and the untold secret is that the first person who sets up a Power BI instance at your organization, they basically determine where and what the region is. Like there's a selection that needs to be done when you're setting this up for the first time. And if this isn't in unison with your cloud strategy as it's going to be in the future, or your cloud strategy as it's already is, this could be an issue because now you've got things in different regions, and you know, usually and or typically most companies try to set things up within a relative region because that's just the way that it is. And then part of their strategy, they may have a secondary region as a failover, or even third, depending on how global they are. But in any event, you know, if this is all done out of order, things wind up like all over the place, and this can be a problem, especially with Power BI and these on-prem gateways, because if they're not in the same region, you're not going to be able to use them in Power BI, and this is a real challenge and or a problem here. So you can change the gateway to a non-Power BI region either intentionally or accidentally. And again, it causes a whole host of issues because Power BI won't be able to use the gateway. And so your default data region is determined by the location during the sign up, again, like I said, for the first time. It also can be changed during installation of the gateway as well. But if you don't do anything, you will miss it because it's kind of obscure and hidden. I'll show you that in just a second. So you might wind up in one of these situations and or scenarios where you say, oh man, I need to change the Power BI region because I set this up, I was the first person there and I chose the wrong region, or you're the IT administrator and one of your employees that's in your department, or maybe even just somebody on the front lines decided, hey, I want to use Power BI, and unbeknownst to you, they set it up and it has nothing to do with your regional cloud strategy that you have going on. So how do you change that? Well, unfortunately, the only way to change this is to reach out to Microsoft and ask for a managed migration in Power BI to move things from region A to region B. Now, if this just got started, it's not such a big deal because you don't have a bunch of data in there. But if you had somebody in there creating a bunch of stuff, turned into production data, and then as an IT administrator or supervisor or CIO, you got wind of this way too late, you may have a big migration on your hands, and so you're going to have to handle that accordingly. All right, number 4, how to change the on-premises gateway, specifically the region within the Azure. Okay, so here is the installer for the on-premises gateway. At the very bottom, there's some text, and then there's a link on that text. Now, you'll notice in this example here, I was setting up a test gateway. Now, my Power BI instance just so happens to be in the West 2 US region, and this was being set up in West Central. Okay, you'll see this on the next screen, so just pay very close attention to this. What's going to happen is this gateway is going to get installed into the wrong region. My Power BI instance is in a completely different area, and so in order to change this, I'll have to go into here and select that text that has a hyperlink or is underlined that says change region. Okay, that's depicted by that arrow. And then I can pick the appropriate and proper region. Now in Power BI, in the Power BI service, you click on the little ellipsis or gear cog at the top. The drop down comes down. You click on help and support that you see from the first arrow, which then will create a secondary flyout menu that says about Power BI. You need to select that to get to this modal window that you see on the right side of my screen here. And there you can see that the data is stored in West US 2. But actually in Azure, it's listed as West 2 US. So be very careful. Sometimes things are the same, but they're not named identical. Microsoft does a pretty good job, but there's nuances that, if you're a real stickler for something being perfectly exact, sometimes Microsoft, being the size of the company they are, especially with employees all over the world, accidents and things do happen. So just kind of, be cognizant of that and just work through it. And if it seems logical, then more than likely it is the way that it's supposed to be, even though it might not be named exactly as you would think it would be. And so I've dealt with that several times, especially in the cloud. All right, number 5, the on-premises gateway. Now this is a critical piece in Power Automate, especially the unattended and the attended RPA. If you're not familiar with RPA, it's robotic process automation, and essentially it's a way for the Power Automate version on the desktop, which by the way is native with Windows 11, and you still have to download it and install it on Windows 10. But in Power Automate, the on-premises gateways are now depreciated. You should not be using on-premise gateways if you're dealing with RPA. It's not necessary. It's all baked into the software. As a matter of fact, there's a sidecar app that comes with the Power Automate on-premise version, which is essentially Power Automate Desktop. And there's this new concept called machine and or machine groups, and you'll manage this in the Power Automate administration area under monitor. And this is where you'll see all of the machines and all of the machine groups. And this is the new way going forward because the old way is depreciated. So if you have any gateways on-prem being used with Power Automate, specifically Power Automate Desktop, you need to change this or at least set it up, because not only is it depreciated, but it's not going to last forever, and then all of a sudden one day things are going to start to break and you're not going to know why, and this is exactly why. Okay, so the other thing, if you're setting this up for the first time, and when you set it up, you had the opportunity to manually make a bad decision to use the on-premise gateway, and it'll say it's depreciated. So if you choose that, that's on you. But the other way is the machine or the machine groups. And this part I am frustrated with Microsoft, and I think you are going to be too. If you do not have the appropriate and proper licensing that I'll talk to and more about in depth at the very end of this presentation. But the bottom line is, or the takeaway is that you will get connectivity errors. They're generic, they're ambiguous, they're not informational. It doesn't tell you, hey, you don't have a proper plan. Would you like to upgrade? Marketing and their technical teams really need to get together on this, because they could drive additional sales and or keep our frustration to a minimum, because as a technician, you're going to simply think that you put in the wrong credentials, you didn't put in the appropriate syntax, something you did was wrong, because it just keeps telling you that there's a connection error. There's nothing to tell you that the reason the connection is an error is because you don't have the proper licensing. So here's a little tip. If you run into connectivity issues trying to establish an on-premise gateway with the RPA on-premises version of Power Automate, then go ahead and set up a trial for this, okay, to the next level, to the next plan. And again, I'll talk about this at the end. If you do that, and then all of a sudden magically the connections start working as you would expect, it's because of the licensing issue, okay? So just keep that in mind. Now, all right, number 6, new versions of the on-premise gateway. They are released monthly, and you need to know this. Most recent 6 version or 6 months of the on-premises gateway are supported from Microsoft. So this is a maintenanceable item. Every 30 days, minimally, I would say every 90 days, that'll give you like a little bit of wiggle room halfway between, the 6 months. So every, 3 months, make sure that you're checking on the gateway and making sure that it is the most recent version, because if you go past 6 months and things break, and they are changing things pretty significantly, at least they have in 2022, that this could wind up being another source of contention and or lack of support from Microsoft, and just a bunch of other problems, because things like this machine and machine groups, you might not have it because you're stuck on some old legacy version or something. All right, number 7. The documentation is super confusing right now. I can't say super enough. There is information all over Microsoft documentation about the on-premise gateway, from the Power BI side to the Power Automate side to the Azure Logic App side to Synapse Studio, blah, 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 blah. It just goes on and on, right? It's everywhere. And so the documentation hasn't caught up with what the on-premise gateway connection is, has, does, and all of its features. So Microsoft, if you're watching this video, please make sure you get the people in the documentation department aware of what's going on here with the gateways, and update all of the areas of Azure, Power BI, which includes the Power Platform, to update the documentation, because nothing is very clear right now. It's still referencing all of the old stuff. And so if you have an on-premises gateway and you're only using it for the Power Platform, and I also tested it with Azure Logic Apps, but I didn't test it with everything on Azure, right? There used to be this thing in Azure called an Azure on-premise gateway that you would have to configure inside of Azure, and it doesn't seem to be necessary right now. It's still there, you can still configure it, but if you find yourself needing to configure it, it can be very, very tricky. And the reason that it's tricky is if you don't know what region the gateway was deployed in. If you remember a couple of slides ago, I showed you how to go into the Power BI service and find out what the region is for the data region that you have set up in Power BI. If you don't know that, and you don't know where the gateway is installed, establishing this in Azure is going to be super hard, and it looks like this. So the region is this pull down, right? And it needs to match the on-premise gateway region that you either overrode or that was chosen by default. And again, if it's chosen by default, it'll look at Power BI and try to figure out where it is. And if it sees it, it'll try to automatically set it up. But it's not perfect. It may not always do that. So when you do that and you pick the appropriate region where the gateway is installed, only then and only then will the installation name dropdown be populated with an instance of what this is. So if we pop over here to, I think I got a screen open here somewhere with Azure. Here we go. Let's go to on-premises gateway. I don't think I have one established here, so let's go ahead and hit create. And we're going to get this here. Okay, we'll just give this a reference group of here. We'll just put any old thing in here for right now. All right, so I don't know what region it is, right? So, but I do. It's West US 2 for me. And so only then will I see I have my on-premise gateway example here. But if I didn't know and just thought it was in West US, or if you remember, it was, I think it was West 2 US or something like that before. It wasn't exactly the same. Anyway, the drop down says no available items. So you absolutely have to nail this dead on to the right region in order for you to get this. Okay, so if you don't get this and you've missed it, this is why this is not going to work for you guys and you won't be able to set it up. But caveat, I don't think this is needed anymore because it seems that just installing the gateway and signing in automatically registers everything for you automatically. And it seems that Azure Logic Apps, which is an Azure service, the big boy to Power Automate, and everything on the Power Platform automatically seems to recognize that it's installed without having to do this step. So I think this step may be depreciated and this is no longer needed. If so, great. But if not, I wanted to put this in here as a tip and a secret because you may need to know this going forward. Number 8, on-premise gateways are linked to the Azure services. I just talked about this, Azure Logic Apps, Synapse, Data Factory, and so on. And so again, it seems to recognize this new gateway. I just talked about this in the previous slide, so I kind of got a little bit ahead of myself. But other Azure services may still require that gateway configuration, and again, I just wanted you to know that. So I kind of combined a little bit of slide 7 and 8 together, or tip secret 7 and 8, because they kind of do go hand in hand. Now this is a really big area. I'm not going to go into every little facet, but I'm going to try to cover at least the majority of the highlights for you. All right, number 1. There are 2 primary areas for managing gateways and as it relates to gateway security. Number 1 is in the Power BI service. And so on the side of Power BI service, you need to lock it down. So you may be saying, okay, great, what does this look like? Well, let me show you. I keep hitting the right, left, whatever mouse button here. Okay, so here is a quick little video. I'm going to click the ellipsis. This is going to give me a drop down. Then I need to go into settings and then manage gateway. Now from this screen, I need to click on the middle tab that says on-premise data gateways. I need to toggle on the switch to the top right so that I can do tenant administration, come and manage the gateway installers. I want to restrict users to install gateways, and I'm going to pick myself from the list, and then I'm going to go ahead and add and then close this sidebar window. Now, in addition to all of this that I don't show in this video, there is a way then of going and selecting the individual, and then you can go in and give very granular specific rights on what they can do, how they can do it, can they add data sources, can they not add data sources, and so on and so forth. So that's another way. Now let's talk about the second way, because I told you there's 2 primary areas. So this was Power BI. In the Power Platform keyword, I'm going to pause, Admin Center. Okay, that's the key word, Admin Center, not the make.powerapps.com experience where you build apps and stuff. Same thing there, and it looks almost identical, except we're in the Admin Center, but you have to go over here and click on this data preview. And so you click that and you get taken to an almost identical screen. Click on premises toggle tenant administration for gateway on, come over and click the button that says Manage Gateway Installers, toggle on the restricted users, find the users, in this case it's just me, and then add them, and then go ahead and close this window down. And again, same thing here as well. Additional configuration can be done. I have, I think, this open already, so I can try to show it to you. Here it is for the on-premises gateway. Here I am. One of the things I can do is manage the users, and as far as manage users in here, I can say what I'm allowed to do. I'm an administrator, but I have another user in here called app user. And so with that, I get some additional information. See how admin doesn't give me any additional options, but this app user is just the weakest option that I have. And I have connection creator. Now down here, I can say what I can do, and read this up here. Share the data gateway with others in your organization. You currently have permissions for the gateway, but I can add and remove and modify any user. And not only can I do this, but I can specifically go into the data source type. And you may be saying, well, what is this all about? This basically says what I'm allowed to do as far as over here on this tab for creating connections to data sources where I have the gateway installed at. So it's kind of like asking somebody to help you manage one of these gateways, okay? And so maybe you want to delegate somebody to be able to add, update, and delete just the SQL Server connections, because maybe they're SQL Server specialists, but they don't know anything really about MySQL or any of the other various data sources. So this is where you go in and set all of this additional information up at. So let's go back into the deck or presentation here, and we'll click on out of here. Now, the final 10th item that I want to talk to you about is service account permission and licensing. Now, I just talked a little bit about the permissions on the security side, but the gateway service account that's used by the installer when you install a gateway, okay, it comes out and it installs its own individual. It's called NT Service PBIEGW service, right? That is the name of the service. Now you can change this to anything or anyone that you want within your organization or within your domain, okay? Just know that if you do this, there's a couple of things that might go on, and there are certain use cases to where certain services require, especially I think there's a couple things in Power Automate Desktop that may require this still, but there was a use case where I'm going to go to remote desktop settings. Okay, so in remote desktop settings, a couple different things. So I'm on Windows 11. It also exists in Windows 10, not like this. There's a different interface, but the same premise. Try to find remote desktop settings. And so what you have to do is turn it on or off. So people are allowed to come and do the remote desktop settings. And so I'm going to toggle this on just for a quick minute. This now means that I can use remote desktop. By the way, the port that is needed for the firewall for this to work is 3389 if you intend to use it. But again, in certain use cases with the gateway, it may be required to do this. But in addition to just turning it on, you also have to say, well, who's allowed to use it? Okay, so here are the remote desktop users. Now, the service account for that gateway is not listed here. So if I needed that service account for that gateway to, essentially be able to use the remote desktop connection and bridge things together, I'm going to need to use that username here that was just there, which is why I specifically mentioned what the name of the service was. The other thing that you can do too is on the installer or on the gateway itself, here I've got it running and you can kind of see it. And so I think under service settings, it tells you what it is as well. So it says gateway service account, and it says to change it, it's running as, and then it gives you the name, which is what I just showed you there. Now, if I click change account, it says, in order to apply the change, I'll need to, do this. So I'll hit apply and restart. And now what'll happen is I need to put in the service account, which is going to be somebody on the local machine. So I don't know if this will work. I actually tried to do it on this machine with this new installer. So it's not going to resolve. I didn't think it was. Okay, so anyway, you just need to know what it is. And if you're not familiar how to get there on Windows 11, just right click on this waffle at the bottom or the Windows icon. You can come over here into manage, computer management. And then from computer management, you'll be able to go into the local users, and then you'll pick the users that's in there, and then you'll get the correct and proper syntax, which you can put here. All right, so that's enough of that. I'm going to go ahead and close this and cancel this because I don't really want to make a change. Let's go back to the presentation. So again, just make sure that if you need to use the remote desktop with any piece or facet of Power Automate Desktop as far as the RPA, this is an additional step that you're going to need to take. Now let's talk about licensing, because this can get really squirrely. So at its most basic level, if we're talking about Power Automate Online, the online version of Power Automate, super easy, super cheap, $15 per user per month. Very fair, very powerful, totally worth it, lots of value. However, there's a use case scenario that you may have, and I'll give you one. There's many, but I'll give you one. There are 5,000 users at Contoso Corporation. And Contoso, while they have 5,000 users, maybe they're only using 2 or 3 Power Apps, and those 2 or 3 Power Apps are using a Power Automate flow, and there's only 3 of them in the entire organization that drives the functionality that's needed for these apps. As a result, if we did 5,000 times 15, that's thousands and thousands of dollars a month. But if I license it $100 per flow, it could potentially, in this example, only be $300 because I can have unlimited users. Each flow I would license at $100 a flow. I can have unlimited users on it. So that would be the use case scenario where that would make the most sense, or how that would apply. All right, now things get sticky when you start talking about RPA and the Power Automate for desktop, because there needs to be an additional licensing. And again, remember I told you that about the connectivity issues, you're not going to get it, you're going to try to integrate it, or you're going to try to add it, and it keeps telling you connection failed, connection can't be found, connection blah, 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 blah. Connection, right? Connection errors. It's probably because you don't have one of these additional licensings. All right, so if you read through this, it says Power Automate per user with attended RPA. It's $40 a month. Okay, so basically what happens is you upgrade from $15 a month. That's what you were paying. And instead of paying that, now you're going to pay $40 per month, because this is Power Automate per user with an attended, keyword attended RPA. Okay, so that's the use case. A user has to be logged in. A user, basically you're going to use this as a user, and you're going to use it in conjunction with something on the back end, Power Automate in the cloud. So, there's a human being, somebody's involved here at this level. Now this is where things get super confusing for most people, and the wheels on the bus start to fall off, because they're like, what are you talking about? It's not so clean on the other side. So remember I told you the use case where Contoso had 5,000 employees but only 3 flows, and so it's $300 a month for the flow. Well, if you start throwing in Power Automate Desktop RPA into the mix, where you've got now something that's going on, say a robot or a bot that's been programmed, and it's unattended, keyword unattended, and you need this thing to be able to go on without somebody there. Maybe it needs to run at midnight. Nobody's working at midnight, so you're going to install this on a virtual machine. You're going to install this on some machine that you may have laying around that's spare, where you can put it on. Bottom line is, it's not you were paying $100 a month. Now you just have to pay an additional $50 more for $150. It's not that at all. You're misinterpreting it. It's stacked. And what stacked means is that you're going to pay $100 per flow per month if that's what you were on. And then you're going to add $150 on top of that in that use case scenario. Now, this isn't how it's going to be for everybody, but only for that use case scenario for Contoso that have 5,000 employees that now have $100 per flow per month, right? They're going to have to pay the $100 plus the $150 per month. Now, if we read down here, it's not just $150 a month. You got to qualify for this too. And what are the qualifications? It says a Power Automate per user with RPA license. That's the item just to the left of this. That's the $40 per month item. So in that use case, it's going to be $40 a month plus $150 per month, okay? Because remember, this 40 overrides the 15. So in the use case of Contoso, we had 5,000 employees but only 3 flows. Well, this use case is maybe we've got thousands or hundreds of flows, and so now the $100 per month per flow is no longer good. So paying $15 per user for the 5,000 users is way cheaper than licensing thousands of flows at $100 a pop. So again, you have to have the $40 per user a month plan, and then you would add on to it $150 in the scenario where it needs to be unattended. So that's the key. Attended versus unattended, and you need to know when it's going to stack on top of either the $40 per month or it's going to stack on top of the $100 per month, okay? And so that's what it's saying here. The Power Automate per user attended RPA, that's the item, $40 per month to the left, and the Power Automate per flow, that's the $100 per month. So you just know your scenarios, know how they work. If you have any questions, this is super confusing, I understand that. Give me a call. I'm more than happy to have a conversation about it. You can go to davidsoden.com. You can request time on my calendar and we can discuss all of this in great detail if you'd like. All right, so that is pretty much what I wanted to cover, but again, I wanted to leave you with this final bit and piece that if you're getting connectivity issues and it's something around licensing to test the water, usually you can fire up a trial, and the trial might get you to the point where you can figure out and or eliminate the problem. Now, maybe somebody already started a trial and they've extended it 1 or 2 times and it won't let you do it anymore. If that's the case, you might want to pick up the phone, call Microsoft support, see if they'll grant you another extension to try it out and or get them to ask you a question. But 90% of the time, at least from the calls and things that I've been involved in, it's always been they don't have the right licensing, and that's why they have the connection issue and or errors. All right, everybody, that's it for this video. Thank you so much. Please like and subscribe and share this information with as many of the technicians as you think would benefit from it. Until the next video, have a great day. Bye-bye.